Good morning, everyone. We are the Group 4, and our topic is Jose Rizal and Popular Nationalism. Our agenda for today is to respond to the following questions. First, what is meant for Rizal to be contextualized, and how does your view of Rizal compare with the underside? Now, before we elaborate and respond to the following questions, let us first define what is popular nationalism. Popular nationalism is Benedict Anderson's term, a national sentiment driven by a country's common people, often as a result of grievances against the ruling class or a majority group's sense that it is being marginalized in a country it believes it should exclusively control. So it is a national emotion that is motivated by the common people as a result of injustice against the governing class or a majority group's perception of marginalization in a nation that it feels it should have total authority over. Jose Rizal and popular nationalism center its attention on Rizal and his vision of the nation, inviting the Filipino people to recover a lost history and vision. The labors of Rizal and his contemporaries in the formation of a Filipino nation had been successful, and it was amply shown by the national uprising against Spain. Rizal became the foremost leader of his people and their nationalist movement, and the principles and ideals which he embraced became deeply established in the heart and mind of his countrymen. He gave his people a sense of dignity and spirit of unity that propelled them on the road of progress and prosperity. Now, to elaborate on what is meant by result to be contextualized, let us hear from Fear.
Thank you, Rina. So, what is indeed meant by Rizal to be contextualized in popular nationalism and the history behind it? To be straightforward, it goes back when Spanish ruled and colonized the Philippines before the Philippine Revolution, 1896 to 1898. There was a big gap between the educated, the elites or ilustrados, and the inarticulate masses who mainly fought and died in wars blindly among the influence of the elite or the powerful leaders who separated them from the truth. They have been established a notion where the Filipinos should have loyalty under moral sanction and utang na loob among the Spanish colonization as they have given the country its necessities. Moreover, awit is about the stories, often dramatized and sung in public or barrios, that impacts the imagination of the Filipino to their ignorance, depending on the fairy tales itself. Awit is just important for the study of revolution as well. For first, as Bernardo Carpio became a hero that enabled the people without history among themselves, his story emphasizes that there is no hope in the liberation against the Spanish rule. Second, the events and the stories behind the awit, Bashan, and in Bernardo Carpio's story became more popular, for it also has been used by the nationalists to communicate their political belief or idea among the people and among the Spaniards. Next up would be the Rizal and the Philippine nationalism, please. Rizal came from a wealthy few and or the Illustrados, and the opportunity to be well educated and even nurture his skills and talents that led him deeper on equality and order in society that increases the desire to reforms and education as how he opens his eyes from the biases and abuses from the Spaniards among the Filipinos. Rizal never wanted a bloodshed or war as a result from his aim to open the mind of Filipinos by inviting them to recover the lost history and visions from his works. But rather, his plea for reforms at that time in education were impossible. But when Rizal died, he influenced numerous natives to fight independence and were able to push through the freedom with their strong nationalism from his viewpoints and his writings. Next up would be Noreen.
All right, thank you so much, Fear. So, according to Bernardo Carpio's Awit and Revolution, all of the utang na loob and loyalty of Filipinos to Spain are rooted to Catholicism or our religion. The Spanish colonial approach sought to weaken native oral tradition by placing the Passion of Christ with it. The life, death, and resurrection of Christ prove how certain events unfold with a man's participation in life and death struggle for independence. This is also where Bernardo Carpio enters as a Spanish hero considered to be someone who can save the Filipinos from the oppressors. And also, Rizal was familiar with the Bernardo Carpio story as the imaging of the aspirations for freedom of the pobre ignorantes which led to the revolution. The popularity of the awit in the 1880s didn't get any objections from the friars with the intellectual repression during the Spanish rule. The parent-child motif in Historia Famosa is an indication of utang na loob, where Bernardo represents the Filipino youth who wants to know his true parents by force, whereas Jimena and Sancho signifies the Philippines. And his stepfather, King Alfonso, who refused to tell him the truth, represents Spain. This speaks of how Filipinos didn't get to have their own identity and were all forced to be separated from the oppressors through revolution. Revolution also intensified during the public execution of the three secular priests, and the execution of the three murdered priests left an unforgettable effect on the young Jose Rizal and the Filipinos who began to empathize the falsely accused priests and develop hatred for the friars. To further elaborate, let us hear from Audrey.
So here is a quote from Bernardo Carpio. So tell the oppressed people that their Bernardo will soon rise and save them. Now, who was Bernardo Carpio? If you have listened to our previous report, he was one of those famous characters that the Spaniards have made in order for the Filipino people to forget about their past. Now, Bernardo Carpio is what you would consider a famous character back in its time. If you would compare him right now in our modern world, he would be a pop culture icon. He would be the Harry Potter of the world, or the Percy Jackson of the world, or so to say. Now, Bernardo Carpio was just one of those famous characters. Another one was Jesus Christ from Passion of Christ. And for the majority of the Filipinos, especially to those the ignorantes, which composed of the common people and the majority of the Filipinos, these famous characters, which only the Spaniards allows them to read, are the only things that people would know. And so, because of that, Filipinos at that time were more or less ignorant and only knows of spiritualism, of Jesus Christ, cosmetology, stuff like that. And so, Jose Rizal enters the era, and he have noticed that people, the Filipinos were brought up on the in ignorance of our yesterday, and were lacking an authoritative voice to speak of what we neither saw or studied. And so he wanted his Filipino people to be enlightened. He wants the ignorance of their yesterday, he wants to change that ignorance to be enlightened. And so in order for him to do that, he decided to fight fire with fire, because Filipinos only knows about what's happening in the world through paper media or the mass press. So he made it lots of written works. And one of the written works that we have all have known and loved right now is the novels Noli Me Tangere and Ed Filibusterismo. And these two novels talks about talks about one, the corruption and wrongdoings of the Spanish friars in the Philippines. And he also showed about individual rights and freedom to the Filipino people. And the Filipino people who have read these works became enlightened to the point where his works were now used by other nationalists as a way to further and spread this nationalistic love, or the love for the Philippines. And now, because of these two novels, because of these works, Filipinos are now starting to revolt against the Spanish friars. Now, but however, why does these novels awaken Philippine nationalism? Well, that is because the life and works of Jose Rizal parallels to some of the life and works that the Spanish friars have put out into the brains of the Filipinos, which we remembered Bernardo Carpio and Jesus Christ. So, and so if you wanted to further know about how Bernardo Carpio and Passion of the Christ help with the Filipino nationalism, you may have to talk about the underside of the Philippine history, which would be further explained by Mylene and Donna.
All right, let us have now the summary of the Rizal in the underside of Philippine history. Before we proceed with the summarization, we have here Dr. Rinaldo C. Aleto, who was born on October 3, 1946. He is a Filipino historian. He published an excellent article entitled The Rizal and the Underside of Philippine History in 1982. So this article composes of 6 sections. First, we have the fall in Ilustrado consciousness. So in an effort to restore the unity of Philippine history and put the discontinuities and differences that characterize colonial society under the control of Ilustrado, Rizal attempted to reconstruct the history of a thriving pre-Spanish civilization that entered a period of decline. Ilustrado view itself as released from thought world of the historyless, superstitious, manipulated masses, the pobre y ignorantes. So they view itself as the educated ones. So the Ilustrados put a lot of effort into eradicating the racist stereotypes that Spanish authors had about the Philippines and Filipinos. They submitted their request for assimilation, good governance, and representation in the Cortes along with the progressive Spaniards. The places where the Ilustrados launched the reform campaigns were the newspaper La Solidaridad and established a Masonic organizations. Later, Rizal came to conclusion that they had to go back to the motherland and start the transformation from within. Next, we have the power of King Bernardo. As you listened earlier from the previous reporters, Bernardo Caprio, the brave king of the Galags, was hidden or imprisoned beneath the secret mountain from which he would one day emerge to free his people. He's seen by being arrogant and believing himself to be superior as God. So the Christian phrase becomes clear when God introduces the possibility of liberation. Bernardo is pointed out as the future savior of the oppressed one who then asked to strangers to remind the people that just as Jesus arose from the grave, someday he too will rise to save his people. And next is the underside. The third one is the underside of Hispanization. So the replacement from village spirits or anitos to Catholic saints, anting-anting to scapulars, chants to calling the spirits to liturgical songs and other behavior shows, however, a more realistic effort for merging Malay beliefs and practices. So the question here is whether the church or the religion contribute to world peace and the concept of salvation, or if it was only a weapon for the oppression and control of Filipinos so that colonialism could continue to spread. Given that the friars of the church were treated with more respect than the principalia because it was thought that the church was a source of power that was controlled by the friars. So the main task of the Spanish missionaries and soldiers in the 17th century was to resettle people within the hearing distance of the church bell at the very center of a hall surrounded by the houses of the local elite. This is to dominate and codify its surrounding. So to continue, let's have Donamir.
Okay, so for the passion interface, the social appropriation of the epic tale of Christ's suffering, death, and resurrection greatly assisted the transplantation of the biblical world to the Philippines. Critics have argued that Gaspar Aquino de Belen, a multilingual native who worked in the Jesuit newspaper in Manila, was creative, which is what gave the Passion its widespread appeal. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph spoke and acted in such a way that others forgot or overlooked their foreign heritage. De Belen was able to convert biblical characters into ones that were authentically national by using the passion of 17th century Spain as his model. So, one notable aspect of the Philippine Rebellion is that its leaders identify as their Jesus Christ or another representation of God. This was a parody of several of the roles played by Christ in the Passion, such as the new ruler, the Messiah, and the God Man. So basically, this section discussed the difference between the passion of the more fortunate individuals who were able to attend a gathering and the passion of the less fortunate. People also created a new image of Rizal considering his deeds, claiming that Rizal's passing represents a passion reenactment. It is troubling to wonder if Rizal intentionally or unintentionally emulates the life of Jesus Christ by curing the sick, providing for the poor, standing up for what he believes is good for the people, and giving his life to save them. So the next one is the textualization of Rizal. For this section, Professor Lieto is referring to the textualization of Rizal, in which his entire life, from his early years to his martyrdom and beyond, is interpreted as an allegory of the lakaran or journey in the Passion Pilapil. Because Rizal embodied the Passion archetype, he was afterwards hailed as a Tagalog Christ and a source of power that later nationalists have tried to draw upon. So another part of a belief in a revolutionary spirituality is its incorporation into the Bernardo Carpio myth as the enlightened stranger who is given authority by the imprisoned king of the Tagalogs, as mentioned earlier by Audrey. So the connection between Rizal and Bernardo Carpio, the real ruler and entombed Christ, is a symbol of the strength, wisdom, and inner purity needed to restore Eden-like tranquility to our colonially devastated nation. So this section of the book uses Rizal's thoughts and advice in an effort to inspire other Filipinos to want a better life for their families, their country, and themselves. It clearly promotes equality and provides motivation for reform and nationalist movements. So for the last one is the meanings of that. So Coates has noted that the pre-science of Rizal, in which dreams contributed only a small part, was extraordinary, verging on the psychic. So within the setting of Philippine provincial life, of course, this quality is nearly anticipated of people such as faith healers, soothsayers, and holders of effective anting-anting. Christ and Rizal's death is always linked. People also thought that, like Jesus Christ, he may soon rise from the dead. They think of Rizal as some sort of talisman with strong anting-anting powers. So, in a rare admission of his innermost thoughts, Rizal revealed to the publicist Marcelo del Pilar in 1890 that he frequently dreamed about the deaths of his friends and family. Even on his deathbed, Rizal had attained the pinnacle of pure power according to the statement, and I quote, Rizal became the necessary senator, the ancestor in the sense of being a source of kapangyarihan for leaders of peasant struggles against both foreign and local oppressors. End of quote. His writings have been preserved. So it is even mentioned that in 1920s, Lantayog gained a large following in the eastern Visayas and northern Mindanao after claiming to be the reincarnation of Rizal. Another powerful peasant leader by the name of Flor Entrencherado proclaimed himself the Emperor of the Philippines and insisted that his powers were from Jose Rizal, the martyred Father Jose Burgos, and the Holy Ghost. So, and another peasant leaders who opposed the colonial rule claimed to be in contact with Rizal. Indeed, much of what underpins current historical writing must be revealed and contested before it can be believed that these peasant leaders were Jose Rizal, just as Rizal was Bernardo Carpio and Jesus Christ. So on the other hand, the clues he left behind, his actions, gestures, and even his absences, as well as the manner of his passing, generated meanings connected to the other largely untold histories of the Philippine past. So to answer the second question, let me give it to Rena.
Thank you, Donna. Now for our last question, how does your view of Rizal compare with the underside? Jose Rizal is often called as the first Filipino because he figures the rise to dominance of the Principalia class, whose Europeanized science became the nucleus around which a modern nation could crystallize. Rizal was well aware that the Philippine traditions were no longer relevant, since their roots were either lost to time or were obviously foreign. Compared to the underside, Filipinos live in a kind of static dream world, somewhat like children initially fascinated and eventually enslaved by the colonizers. They were completely blinded. Due to this, they lost all confidence in their past. They were fascinated by the events like countless festivals, procession, and rituals that they failed to grasp the reality of colonial exploitation. Ignorance and naivety appears to have been the absence of boundaries in the conceptual world of the early Filipinos. The reason why Rizal attempted to reconstitute the unity of Philippine history, to bring under the sway of the Ilustrado mind the discontinuities and differences that characterize colonial society, for the Filipino people to move forward. And in order to do so, they had to be aware of their origin, their history as a colonized people, and the general progress of mankind to which their future should be geared.
Thank you, everyone. This PPT was made in Canva, and I would like to introduce the names of our group mates who made this report possible. If you are curious about where we've got this information, here we have the list of references that we've used in our report. Thank you once again, and Group 4 is signing off.